Thank you, everybody, for coming. I'm not sure how familiar everybody here is with this issue, so maybe a show of hands. How many of you have been following this story and this issue for how long it's been in the headlines? Yeah. Okay, so I'm talking to a knowledgeable audience. So I don't know what I can add to what Jennifer Robinson said, and probably what you're going to hear tonight from the other speakers. But what I'm going to try to do is make it relevant to what you're seeing today, every day in the news. I've picked out a few political developments over the last couple of weeks that are going to, you're going to see the parallels to this story. And this is just a snapshot of the last couple of weeks. And I'm going to tell you that if you watch the news actively, and you're not just a passive news consumer, but you're actively looking at it and trying to understand how it fits into this story, the Assange story, you'll see these parallels popping up every week, depending on where you're looking. And so this is how you make the conversation relevant with your peer group, because I think the intention of a meeting like this is to come here, get more information, get better understanding, and then you go out to your communities, to your families, to your work colleagues, socially, and you'll be able to activate the conversation a little bit more, make it more relevant, penetrate a bit deeper, so people can really understand what's at stake here and how it relates to their everyday life. Watching the headlines, talking about the news, that's part of everyday life. So I'll try to make that relevant. And I was handed a gift, in fact, just a couple of days ago, or just yesterday. Lord Ahmed made a very big announcement. He announced that 30 governments have signed a global pledge as founding members of the New Media Freedom Coalition. Britain, of course, being one of those 30 countries. This is a very honorable cause, no doubt. And I'll quote Lord Ahmed. He said that media freedom is the bedrock on which all other freedoms are based. I think we can all agree with that, right? That's absolutely correct. Nice words, but talk is cheap, unfortunately. And he took the liberty, no pun intended, of quoting Thomas Jefferson during his speech this week. He said, "The liberty of speaking and writing guards our other liberties." He's talking about freedom of the press. And he assured everybody in the global community that this means that the countries who are signing this declaration for media freedom, that laws will be held to the highest standards. Okay, it sounds great on paper. And he said, a free media is essential to any flourishing democracy. So that should give you a clue as to who this initiative is targeted at. Flourishing democracies, the developing world. This is what this media freedom campaign is about. It's not anything to do with the developed world, because there are no laws on the books that guarantee protection for journalists or media organizations. We don't have explicit protection. We do have in the United States, in the First Amendment of our Constitution, the press is specifically mentioned. The Fourth Estate is specifically mentioned in the Bill of Rights. It's one of the only countries, to my knowledge, that has that in writing in our Constitution in the United States. But in this country, it's based on precedent, case law. It's also based on the mercy of the courts at the end of the day. And I think that's what we've seen with Julian Assange's situation right now. He wouldn't be where he is right now if there were rights that were guaranteed for press, for free media that Lord Ahmed is referring to. And I might add as well that the 30 governments have signed this pledge. Governments have signed this pledge, not countries. Governments have signed this pledge, because I think if you took a temperature test amongst the population, at least of this country, if people who really had a chance to give their informed opinion about this issue, not the same informed opinion that you might be reading in The Guardian and some mainstream media outlets like this that have, I think, twisted and distorted this story over the last few years to demonize one of the most decorated journalists of our generation. Not that informed opinion. I'm talking about what you just heard from Jen Robinson before this. That level of informed opinion, I think it's pretty clear that the people of this country would be demanding a little bit more than just media, a pledge for media freedom from this new coalition. But this is what's going on, and this is an extension of what Jeremy Hunt was fronting this media freedom campaign with Amal Clooney as well, who I believe used to be on Julian Assange's legal team way back when, and has been a little bit reticent to publicly come out and defend him, although she has said a few encouraging words of late. But so how free is the press in the United States? That's debatable. How free is the press in Britain? That's debatable too. I will point to a recent article by Mark Curtis that was published recently, talking about the changing of the guard at The Guardian after the Snowden documents were released, and also about the D-notice system in this country. So do we really have a free press? To what level have the security services penetrated some of these big media organizations? And what does that mean in terms of having a functioning fourth estate? These are all issues, I think, that are relevant to this conversation. But in regards to Julian Assange, the big danger is that you can make a separate set of rules for journalism that appears to threaten the interests of national security or official secrets. But this can easily be extended to, and we're seeing this now, you can see it in the rhetoric, this definition is getting more elastic, it's getting looser, to the point where it's not just the concerns about national security if it threatens the national interest. And tell me, how do you define that? The economic interests of the country, how do you define this? So anything is a potential threat which might undermine national security, national interests, the economy. Where does it end? So what protections do the press, does the free media have in that kind of an environment? These are very important questions, and they're absolutely relevant to the WikiLeaks and Julian Assange case. This is a dynamic situation. This isn't happening in a vacuum. And it's not just happening in the courts. It's a living, breathing issue that's happening now every day. And you're getting absolutely inundated with it if you look at your news headlines. So in terms of bail skipping, I think it's pretty clear, reading the legal analysis, that the bail skipping charge which Julian Assange was held under was in violation of international law. It's in violation of multiple international conventions. I think any honest international law lawyer or human rights lawyer can look at that and make that determination. He's being held on a bail skipping charge, never charged with any crime in Sweden, and a case that was dropped not once but twice, technically 3 times. So what is the provenance of his incarceration, of his apprehension and his incarceration? So I'm just giving you important points to be able to highlight, because when you go out to talk to people, you need to be able to understand these basic points. Here's another basic point. When the British police stepped inside the Ecuadorian embassy to apprehend Julian Assange on this non-existent crime that he was wanted for questioning. He was never charged with anything in Sweden, ever. When they stepped in onto sovereign Ecuadorian soil, that's an act of extraordinary rendition, technically, okay? And we all know how we're supposed to feel about this horrible thing called extraordinary rendition that we labored over during the War on Terror. And there it is, it happens right in central London. So, unless you want to erase international law and just forget about all of those conventions, forget about all of those treaties, and just brush that all aside, then it's perfectly normal to have 9 British police officers barreling into the Ecuadorian embassy to forcibly remove Julian Assange. So that's on one side of that argument. And I'm going to add, too, that if you watched the news of the last 3 weeks, did you not see the American establishment and the UK establishment in fits over China wanting to extradite a Chinese citizen from a Chinese territory to mainland China, as if this was some great breach of human rights? How is it that you can have that conversation nationally or internationally, and you cannot place this issue of Julian Assange being extradited by the United States, a non-US citizen, WikiLeaks, a non-US media outlet, and you can't argue that in the same sentence? When have those ever appeared in the same article together? Certainly there's a discussion to be had. Is there not a double standard at play? But I think the media is very adept at separating these issues and compartmentalizing them so that we're generally none the wiser. But we need to bring those issues together to show the hypocrisy, to show that the press itself, the mainstream press, is guilty. The journalists are guilty. These are the most high-paid, most celebrated journalists in the Western world, and they can't put those two issues together and say, hey, these don't really add up, do they? We have a problem here. No, they've compartmentalized and separated it. And Julian Assange also relates to another case that's high profile right now, and that is Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe. She employee of Thomson Reuters Foundation. She is currently serving, she's halfway through a 5-year sentence. She's being detained in Iran under spying charges. And the media is absolutely up in arms about the fact that she's been separated from her family and that she's a parent and that this is wrong. She's being wrongly held and the sham trial over espionage charges. Okay, that's exactly the situation that we're looking at with Julian Assange. But there's an automatic assumption that because it's happening in Iran, for some reason it's fundamentally wrong. But if it happens in Britain, it's okay. If it happens if he's sent down in the Western District of Virginia in a national security court, that's okay. For espionage, under a 100-year-old law that was designed with World War I domestic espionage issues in mind when they put that piece of legislation together. Okay, that's what they are attempting to pull Julian Assange to the United States under, an out-of-date, arcane piece of legislation that's completely irrelevant to today's world. They're trying that on, and that was rubber-stamped by the courts here this past summer. This is why he's still detained. He's under an extradition order, a U.S. extradition order. So there's a massive double standard there. Julian Assange is a parent. He has family. His rights are being denied, and I support all of those cases, but only equally, not to cherry pick, as our media is doing, that some cases deserve sympathy and others don't. And that's exactly what's happening. And the press is doing this willfully. Those should do a Google search. Tell me if you can find them in the same article on any of the mainstream media outlets. You won't see them. And that's just, to me, a no-brainer from a journalist's point of view. All these issues need to be discussed in their totality and not separated. And that's what we need to do as well when we get out into the world. So, and the same with the Dirac leaks. Does everybody remember that story? British ambassador to the United States, Kim Dirac, and those leaks came out, and then we hear the assistant commissioner, deputy commissioner, I believe, of the Metropolitan Police saying that those leaks are the property of Her Majesty's government, should be returned to the rightful owners straight away. These are leaks already out in the press. Had to walk back that statement a couple of days later and said, no, we didn't quite mean that. We understand that the press has a right to report if it's in the public interests. But you could see that the state was ready to take a very aggressive stance on this issue of leaking classified information, news gathering, freedom of the press, but then was forced to pull back because there was pushback. But that is absolutely related to the WikiLeaks and Julian Assange case. That story should be debated in the same breath as the Assange and WikiLeaks case. I have many other examples, including the Hawaii leaks with Gavin Williamson, then Defense Secretary. There's too many other parallels. And so what's that? Yeah. So the last thing I will say to Lord Ahmed is, it would be nice if the Media Freedom Coalition might spare a little bit of consideration for the fact that you have an administration in the United States that on paper is planning to lay waste to the First Amendment of the U.S. Bill of Rights and Constitution, which is essentially what they're attempting to do. There can be no doubt about this indictment, these 17-plus indictments against Julian Assange, and they're even holding Chelsea Manning and now Jeremy Hammond in detention, non-cooperative detention. Why? Because they're not turning federal evidence against Assange. They wouldn't be doing that if they actually had a case against him. But they seem to be struggling to put that case together. And to my knowledge, Manning and Hammond are not cooperating as far as I know. And so they're being detained, one in solitary confinement, and at least one being fined $1,000 a day. So we'll be over $500,000 in the hole by the time they let Chelsea Manning out. I don't know about Jeremy Hammond, but that's pretty shocking. I would like to comment from the Media Freedom Coalition on that issue, on all the facets of these issues that we've just talked about, that I've mentioned right now. So when that happens, then we have hope that a conversation can happen in the mainstream, in the discourse. We have hope that can happen. When I see these people championing press freedom, these grand initiatives, when they're talking about these issues, then I will have a tremendous hope that the Assange, the WikiLeaks case, the issue will be resolved one day. But until we see that conversation happening in the main, I'm very worried that this will not be resolved. And so that's my main concern. So all I can say is to everybody out there, to get as informed as you can, and understand the key points and really drive them home to people within your sphere of influence, because that's the only way. Public awareness is the only way that this issue is going to be won in the end. But thank you very much.